For this lab, you're going to be separating a mixture of sand, salt, and iron. To separate this mixture, we're going to have to use different techniques. First thing we need to do, though, is establish the mass of the mixture. So I'm going to put the mixture on a watch glass, and so I need to first determine the mass of the watch glass without the mixture on it. And then when I add the mass of the mixture, I can then determine the mass of the mixture through subtracting. Then we're going to add the mixture to the watch glass. So I'm just going to dump it right out of the bag. We'll set the bag aside. And you can see we have our mixture. I'm going to add that mixture to the balance, and I'm going to record that mass. By subtracting out the empty watch glass, I could determine the mass of my mixture. The next step is I want to start separating the mixture. The first thing I'm going to separate out is the iron filings. I could do this with a magnet. So here I have a ceramic ring magnet, and I don't want to just put the magnet up to the mixture because then all the iron filings will get stuck to the magnet, and I won't be able to determine the mass of the iron filings. So what I want to do is I want to put it in a bag so that I have a barrier, and so I could put this up to the iron filings, move it around, get all the iron filings stuck to the magnet, and then I could just turn the bag inside out and have all my iron filings in the bag. To make sure that I get all the iron filings, I'm going to dump out my mixture on this piece of scrap paper that I have, and I'm going to spread it out so I don't have any iron filings that are buried. Make sure I get everything. And then of course I'm going to put my magnet over, and it is removing the iron from the mixture. Okay, so you can see it accumulating on the magnet. And so I'm going to keep on doing this until I'm reasonably certain that I've got all of the iron filings out of the mixture. So I'm looking for any black dots that are remaining. I don't want any black dots in my mixture. So this is me effectively removing one of the three components. Okay, it looks like I have most of the, or all the iron now. So I'm going to turn my bag inside out, thus capturing the iron in the bag. I will then be removing my magnet now that the magnet is on the outside of the bag and the iron is on the inside. So I could set that I could set that magnet aside, and I have my iron filings in the bag. I did make a mistake though. I should have gotten the mass of the empty bag, and so we'll have to get that after I empty the iron filings out. To get the mass of the bag and the iron filings, I'm going to put a beaker on the balance. I'm going to tear the balance with a beaker on it, so the beaker's not detecting the the balance is not detecting the beaker. And then I'll put this right in there to hold it in place. And I'm just taking the mass of the empty bag, or the bag with the filings. And so the mass of the bag with the filings, so record that. And now, because I did skip a step and I forgot to take the mass of the empty bag, I'm going to empty my iron filings into my spare beaker over here just to get them out of the way. And then I'll get the mass of my empty bag. So I'll dump those iron filings in the beaker over here. So now the bag's empty, and I'll get the mass of the empty bag. And make sure we record that mass. And then the difference between the bag with the iron filings and the empty bag will be the mass of the iron filings. I want to get my iron filings back in that bag, so I still have an empty beaker to use later in the lab. I have a couple that fell on this. Okay, we'll set the iron filings aside because we're done with those. So the next step is to take my mixture of sand and salt, and I want to begin separating that. To accomplish this, I need to dissolve the salt in water. Since the sand does not dissolve in the water and the salt does, by adding water, I'm putting the salt into solution, and the sand will remain at the bottom, and I can filter it. So I'm going to add approximately 50 milliliters of distilled water. And now I will stir this for 10 minutes. The stirring action makes it easier for the salt to dissolve because the water particles are moving around more, and so they could solvate the crystals quick. There are 3 things that increase the rate of dissolving. There is increasing the surface area, so if I were to grind the salt into a finer powder before I mixed it, that would enhance the rate of dissolving. I could also agitate the mixture, that's what I'm doing by stirring, or I could heat the water, creating more space between the solvent particles, making it easier to dissolve as well. So I'm going to mix, 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 mix. Because this is a virtual lab, we'll be able to fast forward this. Now that I've been stirring for 10 minutes, I'm ready to filter. And so all my salt should be dissolved at this point. And what I need to do is I need to filter, and filtering will allow the sand to be on the filter paper and the salt to go through the filter paper because now it's in solution. So I want to get the mass of 2 things. I want to get the mass of my empty beaker, and so this is my empty beaker. Get the mass of that real quick. And then I also want to get the mass of my dry filter paper, so I can subtract it out later. Now I'm ready to filter. To accomplish filtration, I'm going to use a Buchner flask and a Buchner funnel. And so how a Buchner flask and funnel work are they hooked up to an aspirator that is screwed into a sink faucet, and using Bernoulli's principle, the aspirator creates a constriction in the water, so the velocity of the water or the velocity of a fluid is increasing, which causes a decrease in pressure, and then that decrease in pressure is conveyed to the flask. Okay, and so anything I pour in the top will be pulled right through. And so when I turn on the water, I have the increase in velocity of the fluid right here. I have a decrease in pressure conveyed to the flask, and so I have suction. So you can hear the difference when I put my hand on there. And so that will allow me to pull my mixture right through. So I'm going to first take the filter paper and I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to wet it so I have a good seal. And so I'm ready to pour my mixture right in there. When I go to pour my mixture, inevitably there's going to be some left behind, so I'll have to use my wash bottle to rinse that through. So I'm going to pour. You can see not all of it made it through, and so I'm going to rinse that right in using my wash bottle, which is one of the primary purposes for having a wash bottle. Okay, so I'm going to wait for all of my water to be pulled through, leaving just the sand on top. And mind you, this is salt water, and so I'm effectively removing the salt from the sand. And then the next thing I'll have to do is I'll have to dry the sand, and I'll have to boil off the water from the salt solution. And then I'll be able to get the mass of the sand and then the mass of the salt. All right, I've given it enough time. I'm going to shut off the water. And we could see that I have the sand on the filter paper up top. And so what I could do is I could scrape that right onto my watch glass. Let me make sure you guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to scrape that out. And so now we have the filter paper, the watch glass, and the sand, as well as some remaining water that's soaked in the sand, so I'll have to dry that out. Once I dry it out, I should be able to subtract out the weighing paper and the watch glass, and the remaining mass will be the mass of the sand. Down below in the Buchner flask, I have the salt solution. So if I pour my salt solution into a beaker, I know I did a good job because I have no remaining sand in there. And I'm ready to heat it. And I'm gonna put it right on the hot plate, put it on high, and I'll bring this to a boil. Once I boil off all the water, what will be remaining is the salt. Well, I have the mass of the empty beaker, and then if I get the mass, I can subtract out the empty beaker, and then I'll have the mass of the salt. So the next step would be to go ahead and put this in the drying oven. Here we are at the drying oven, and we're going to place this right in there. We will return later. It's been roughly 15 minutes, so we're going to check on our our sand, and looks like it's adequately dry. So I'll remove that very carefully, and I'll set it on a piece of wire gauze so the hot glass doesn't come in contact with the cold table, because if I do that, then it will shatter. So I'll wait for this to cool off, and then we'll get the mass. Now that it's adequately cooled, we could then take the mass. So I'll place it on the balance, and our mass is 33.46 grams. As we could see, as it boils, the water is evaporating. As it gets down to the bottom, it begins to flatter, so I've placed a watch glass on top to make sure that all the salt stays in the beaker. As soon as I don't see any more moisture in the bottom, I need to remove it from the heat. Otherwise, the beaker will crack because the water is absorbing the heat for the glass. If there's no water to absorb the heat, the glass will try to expand until it cracks. So I'm approaching that moment. And so I have my glove on, and I'm listening for the noise to stop the crackling. I'm just about there, and I'll remove it now. I'm going to set it directly on wire gauze so that it doesn't come in contact with the cold lab surface, because the temperature shock would break the beaker. So I'm going to let this cool off, and then I'll be ready to take the mass. If it's cool enough to touch it, it's cool enough to weigh it. So I'll take my beaker and I'll get my final mass. Wait for it to stabilize, and it looks like we have 53.97 grams.